We're now up to section 2 of the syllabus, which says that plants and animals transport dissolved nutrients and gases in a fluid medium. So the first dot point we're going to look at is identify the forms in which the following are carried in mammalian blood. So we'll be looking at carbon dioxide, oxygen, water, salts, lipids, nitrogenous wastes, and the other products of digestion. So it is an identified dot point, so we just need to be able to name the forms. However, we do have a plural here, which means we need to know multiple forms for some of these different substances. Before we go on and have a look at each of these different substances and how they're carried in the blood, we're going to just go back and have a look at a little bit of information on transport systems and blood in particular, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the transport of dissolved nutrients and gases. Plants and animals require a transport system in order to distribute food and oxygen to active cells and to remove wastes. Unicellular organisms, because they're so small and only made up of one cell, can rely on the processes of osmosis, which is the movement of water from a high concentration to a low concentration across a semi-permeable membrane, diffusion, and active transport of substances to allow them to be exchanged directly between the inside of the cell and the environment. Multicellular organisms, such as most plants and animals, however, require specialized transport systems in order to get these nutrients in and the waste products out. There are some common features of transport systems, and these include a suitable transport medium, which is usually a fluid which allows the substances to travel, the presence of vessels in which the substances then move, and a driving mechanism to ensure that the substances move in the correct direction. Plants have what is known as a vascular system for transport, which is made up of the xylem and phloem. We looked at xylem and phloem a little bit in year 11, and we'll be having a look again at the specific mechanisms involved in the transport of substances in those two vascular tissues. And mammals, such as humans, have a cardiovascular system, so a system of blood vessels, veins, arteries, capillaries that ensure that the blood travels around the body in one direction and transports different substances to and from cells. So human blood is broken into two main components. So we can see here the yellowy plasma is the liquid component that is made up of about 90% water. And then we have the cellular part. So what gives us our blood that red color, which is made up of erythrocytes, which are red blood cells, our leukocytes, which are white blood cells, and platelets, which are cell fragments. So plasma is the straw-coloured liquid, so it's a yellowy liquid. It is made up of about 90% water and contains dissolved substances. So the job of plasma is to transport substances in solution, which means that usually that they're dissolved around the body. So some examples include urea, carbon dioxide, salts, amino acids, hormones, antibodies, and vitamins. White blood cells, which are collectively known as leukocytes, are fewer in number in comparison to our red blood cells. However, there's a couple of different types that have different jobs, and we'll be looking at those in a little bit more detail in the Search for Better Health topic. Our white blood cells have a nucleus, whereas our red blood cells don't, and are quite a bit larger than our red blood cells. And their job is to help to fight disease, in particular infections, undergo phagocytosis and things like that. Our red blood cells, which are collectively known as erythrocytes, are a biconcave disc shape. So they look a bit like a donut, however, they don't have the hole in the middle, and they're about 7 to 8 micrometers in diameter. They don't have a nucleus, which we'll be having a look at why that is the case a little bit later. They're much higher in number than our white blood cells, and they contain a special molecule called hemoglobin. Their job is to carry large amounts of oxygen around the body by binding it with that hemoglobin, and we'll be looking in particular at hemoglobin. There's a dot point just specifically looking at hemoglobin a little bit later. And the red blood cells also carry small amounts of carbon dioxide. And lastly, platelets are small cell fragments which are made from the bone marrow, and their job is to help clot the blood. So when you cut yourself, it is the platelets that help to join together in order to form a scab and to stop the bleeding. So let's have a look now at the actual dot point, so in identifying substances that are transported by plants and animals. So to maintain homeostasis, there needs to be a transport system within the body to enable nutrients that are needed by particular cells or waste produced by particular cells to be delivered to the specific sites so that their concentration can remain constant. Some of these nutrients include water. So water is carried around the body in the form of plasma, and the blood plasma is about 90% water. Oxygen. Oxygen is carried in the blood as oxygen-hemoglobin combination in the red blood cells. In the cells, oxygen is needed for cellular respiration to create energy. So cellular respiration is different from breathing. So we breathe in order to get the oxygen into our systems, but the main reason we need oxygen is for this process of cellular respiration, which takes place in the mitochondria of all our cells in order to produce to create energy using oxygen and glucose. Oxygen does not readily react to form an acid and can only be held in water in solution. The cells need a good supply of oxygen, and if oxygen was only carried dissolved in solution in the blood, it would only be able to carry a small amount. Hemoglobin is a complex molecule consisting of 4 peptide chains or protein chains, which increases the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Each molecule of hemoglobin is able to carry 4 oxygen molecules. The hemoglobin molecule attaches loosely to the oxygen molecule so that when it reaches the respiratory surfaces in the lungs, it can be released. In red blood cells in mammals, the nucleus is lost from cells and the cells acquire hemoglobin. So the loss of the nucleus may be a biological advantage as the cell has more space for more hemoglobin molecules. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 oxygen molecules, which increases the rate at which oxygen can enter the blood. At high altitudes, where oxygen supply is low, people become drowsy, develop headaches, and suffer mental fatigue and can fall into unconsciousness because our cells aren't getting enough of this oxygen to carry out cellular respiration. Long-term responses to living in high altitudes, such as the Himalayas, include an increase in lung ventilation, an increase in hemoglobin production, an increase in total blood volume, and an increase in the number of capillaries in tissues, and they can develop a bigger chest size, as in lung size. So carbon dioxide, about 70% of the carbon dioxide reacts with the water in the blood, or in the plasma more specifically, to form carbonic acid. And this increases the acidity of the water or the plasma. So because we're increasing the acidity, our pH is lowering. To maintain a constant pH in the blood, the carbonic acid reacts with a buffer so that the pH is maintained between about 7.3 and 7.45, so a neutral pH. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of respiration, so that reaction where oxygen plus glucose gives energy, and one of the byproducts is carbon dioxide, which we need to get rid of. So they're produced in all of the cells, or carbon dioxide, is produced in all of the cells, and then needs to be carried back to the lungs where it is removed. Increased levels in carbon dioxide in the blood stimulates the breathing center in the brain to send messages to the ribs and the diaphragm to increase our breathing rate. About 23% of the carbon dioxide combines with hemoglobin once it's delivered the oxygen to the cells, forming a substance known as carbaminohemoglobin. And about 7% of the carbon dioxide in our blood dissolves directly into the plasma. Now salts. So sodium, potassium, magnesium, chloride ions, sulfate ions, and phosphate ions are transported as either positive or negative ions in solution in the plasma. So when these substances dissolve, they form ions, and they're carried around just in the watery part of the plasma. Iron, however, forms a loose combination with the plasma protein to form a transferrin iron complex. So we also have nitrogenous wastes first. So these form as a waste product from the breakdown of proteins in the liver. They are mostly in the form of urea with a small amount of creatinine and uric acid. So these are carried via the blood to the kidneys, where they are removed and excreted by the body in urine. So high levels of nitrogenous wastes lead to us producing a more concentrated urine. And if we have a good supply of water, we usually produce larger amounts of urine, but they're not as concentrated because we have this excess water that's found in there. Lipids, which are also known as fats, are water insoluble, so they don't dissolve in water and will only travel in the blood when they are coated in proteins called lipoproteins. They are also sometimes carried as fatty acids and glycerol suspended in the blood plasma. And lastly, other products of digestion. So these travel as separate molecules and can include amino acids, glucose, and other types of sugars. They can be dissolved or suspended in the plasma, depending on which molecules we're looking at. So glucose and other sugars are needed as energy sources, which we talked about already in up here with the oxygen. So glucose is required in order to be able to carry out photosynthesis. Glucose is a product of photosynthesis required in all organisms to carry out respiration. So amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and vitamins are needed to regulate various processes throughout the body. So the next 2 dot points we're going to look at in the video is identify the pH as a way of describing the acidity of a substance. So it's simply an identify, and so looking at pH and acidity. And secondly, perform a first-hand investigation to demonstrate the effect of carbon dioxide on the pH of water. So we're looking at an effect. So what is the effect of changing the carbon dioxide levels on the pH of water? So the pH scale, we basically can answer this dot point by rewording the dot point. So the pH scale determines the acidity or basicity of a substance. Also, this word basicity can be alkalinity. You may have heard of acids and alkalines or acids and bases. So acids have a low pH, so between 1 and less than 7. So anything with a pH of less than 7 is an acidic substance. Obviously, the closer to 7 it is, the less acidic it is. The further away from 7, so towards 1 and 0, the greater the acid is. From 7 to 14 are our bases. So just above 7 is slightly basic, through to 14 is the most basic. So something like hydrochloric acid is extremely acidic, whereas drain cleaners are very basic. Our blood, as we've already looked at, has a pH of about 7.4, so it falls within this neutral zone here. And water, we aim to have our water at about 7. Okay, water that falls from the sky, which is rain, has a slightly lower pH because of the chemical substances that are in the air, dissolves in the water and causes it to be slightly acidic. So for the first-hand investigation, we're going to have a look at how carbon dioxide affects pH. So as we've already looked at, carbon dioxide is produced in living organisms as a result of cellular respiration. When carbon dioxide dissolves in water, it forms carbonic acid, which is toxic to our cells. All organisms get rid of carbon dioxide as quickly as possible before it can interfere with the chemical activities of the cells. And we know that when the pH of the cells is not balanced, then we can have issues with our enzymes denaturing. If the pH is too low, if the pH is too high, the active site changes and we end up with our enzymes not functioning properly. So mammals breathe out carbon dioxide from their lungs, and this can be demonstrated by breathing out into a test tube of lime water. So we remember back from junior school that when you add carbon dioxide to lime water, the lime water turns milky, indicating the presence of carbon dioxide. So the aim of this investigation is to demonstrate the effect of dissolved carbon dioxide on the pH of water. So the materials that you'll be using, you'll have a test tube, a straw, some universal indicator, and a pH probe. So some safety precautions to think of is just as you do the investigation, you'll see that you'll be actually blowing or using the straw to blow carbon dioxide into the test tubes. So obviously you want to make sure that you don't drink the solution. Sounds pretty straightforward, but we just need to make sure that everybody is aware of that. Clean up any spills that may occur. If you break the test tube, dispose of it appropriately. And because you are blowing into the test tube, the method says to only blow for a few seconds at a time. But if you begin to feel lightheaded, just like you're blowing up a balloon, sometimes you can feel lightheaded. Stop blowing, have a break, and when you feel fine again, you can continue with the investigation. So with the method, you'll simply be adding a few drops of universal indicator to a test tube containing water. Use a straw to gently blow into the solution and determine the change in pH using the color chart. So once you've put the universal indicator into the water, write down the initial pH, blow into the water using a straw, and then write down the pH as the investigation continues. You will then repeat using a second test tube and collect data from another class member and find the final pH. So that brings us to the end of this video. So thank you.